Again, welcome. I'm Dr. Debra Dupree, and together I host this with Felicia Amenta from the County Office of Education Joint Powers Authority. And we communicate regularly, as I'm sure she does with a lot of you. But we started to do this earlier in 2020 because we found that a lot of similar questions kept surfacing. And between the two of us, I don't even want to tell how many years of experience we have between the two of us, but let's just say it's lots. It's lots, okay? And so I thought there's got to be a better way, and I'm sort of an educator at heart, and so there's got to be a better way of disseminating this kind of information quickly and easily to people. So that's how we started our Mindset Mondays Q&A sessions that we do once a month, and we sort of take whatever hot topics are going on or what might be some frequent questions that we're hearing from people like you in the community. And so today, as you might remember from your announcement, and I'm in the interest of transparency, I have a screen over here, which is where I'm going to read this from. We're going to talk about how to implement the Cal OSHA emergency regulations, also the AB 685 notification letters. How do or what do the new EEOC guidelines on COVID-19 vaccination imply that just came out in mid-December? And then if you do adopt a mandatory vaccination policy or have employees vaccinated on site, what do you need to consider? Okay, and so welcome, Felicia, and everybody.
Thank you. It's lovely to be back and lovely to see everybody in the virtual world.
Yes, we'll see when that happens, right? With now, well, we'll be wearing masks for a while, but hopefully things will turn around before the end of the school year. We'll see, right?
Right. That's what we're hopeful.
We're hopeful. Yep. Well, it's certainly been an interesting weekend with the news too, as far as what's happening with school sites across the country and what the findings are. So the implications of what that means remains to be seen, I guess. Yeah. Okay. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and start off with our first topic on how to implement the Cal OSHA emergency regulations requiring written and posting of COVID-19 prevention plans as part of your IIPP. And so Felicia, why don't we start with you giving your update and your perspective on what does this mean?
Well, so we've had a lot of questions because the Cal OSHA regulations were put into force immediately. So that didn't give a lot of the school districts very much time. The good news about the Cal OSHA emergency regulations is a lot of the districts already had COVID implementations and safety plans. Some of them were more informal and some of them were very formalized. What the Cal OSHA emergency regs state is that you have to have your COVID prevention plan as part of your IIPP. And some people didn't have a separate plan actually adopted and part of their IIPP. So the good news is we had sample plans through loss control at the JPA. And that was really helpful. So some of the districts took those sample plans and then kind of customized their own plan that worked for their district off of that. And some districts already had a plan and they just had to formalize it and include it in their IIPP. What also was in those Cal OSHA emergency regulations was training. Cal OSHA had some training available. SDCOE and the JPA decided to also make some training because we do have a learning library module that's available to all JPA members. And so that training is either completed or almost completed and on the learning library and available for all districts to use that are members of the JPA for the mandatory training of their staff. And then obviously when the COVID preparedness plan is done, it has to be posted. So it was because it went into effect so immediately, we had to do a little bit of catch up to get everything ready. So it caused a little bit of a panic, a little bit.
Okay, and so what kind of suggestions do you have for your members? And I want to just acknowledge to everybody too, is feel free to put questions into the chat room as we go along. So that way I can be monitoring that and bring that to Felicia and my attention. And that way, you have a chance to ask on the moment as well as get some guidance here.
Well, as our member districts know, we do have three loss control representatives available that are a great resource. And because we have a lot of tools, the one thing I would recommend is don't reinvent the wheel. You can take yours and then you can look at the sample that we have and sort of compare it, make sure that you meet all of the targets and that you have everything in there. And then there have been a lot of questions that have gone back and forth that have been fielded between loss control and myself, helping with the preparation of that document and including it with the IIPP and posting it. And there obviously have been a lot of questions about the training that's mandatory for staff. And so that's when we decided to develop the training. That way, all districts don't have to develop their own training. We're going to develop something that meets our training program meets all the Cal OSHA guidelines. So don't reinvent the wheel and start out on your own. Start with talking to us in loss control about any help that you need and any questions that you have.
If I could just piggyback on that in a little bit different way, because I know most people know me through the interactive process, but that's true for that area too. There's a lot of sample letters and forms and things like that. So if you're getting ready to do something, again, rather than starting from scratch, I probably have a template for something, that you can use as a starting point, and I'm happy to share that. So great. Any questions that participants have, you can go ahead and mute yourself or put your question into the, okay. Christina did ask, will the JPA COVID-19 training be available in Spanish, Felicia?
So that's a great question, and I'll double check on that. I know that currently it is being, that it's in English, but I'll reach out to the loss control and see if we can get that also placed on there in Spanish. That's a really good point.
Excellent point. Yeah. Okay, great. So then we have all of the AB 685 notification letters as well. And so that is another wrinkle that's really put people on the hot spot, so to speak, in terms of having to shift quickly and rapidly, and then we had the holidays, and so what's sort of happening in that part of the world, Felicia?
The AB 685 came so soon on the backs of SB 1159. We were really just, we had a webinar on SB 1159, and all of the districts were starting to report into our TPA Athens COVID portal, which you have to do within 3 business days of your knowledge of a positive COVID test for an employee. So we were just getting that system kind of up and running and everybody familiar with that. We had a lot of questions about the 4 questions that are on the Athens portal. And then along came AB 685. And AB 685 was in effect on 1/1 this year, after the new year. And that also did not give districts very much time because the holiday break was there, and then all of a sudden 1/1 was upon us. And after 1/1, as those of you know, AB 685 is only 1 business day from your notification of a positive COVID on site to notify all the employees and any owners of subcontractors and the union and the county health department about positive COVIDs. And this is with your knowledge, of course. You can't notify if you don't know. And those notifications are done in the way that you normally would respond out at SDCOE. Those notifications go out by a mass email that we have at SDCOE. And so districts are using whatever their normal intranet or their internal communication would be. We've had a lot of questions about a lot of different areas about who needs to be notified. Like if you're in M&O or you're a custodian, but you never walked into a building where the COVID positive was, do you need a notification? So that's a frequent question that we get, like who needs to be notified? With SDCOE and a lot of the districts that are on here, the way we do it is when you enter our site every day, you're logged into a computer. And so they actually do know who's on site every day. So that makes it easier for them both to report into the COVID reporting portal to Athens, because there's some questions that you have to answer about how many employees were on site. And on the notification side, it helps too. We also have sample letters that SDCOE has created that have the required, because you have to let them know about workers' comp, you have to let them know about your COVID benefits, you have to let them know about your safety protocols. Some districts are putting links in that go to their websites for that information. Some districts are actually attaching attachments to that letter. So it can get quite hefty when you think about all the things that need to be included. A lot of people ask me if a claim form needs to be given to everybody that gets that notification letter, and the answer is absolutely not. But you do have to have the language that's on page 2 of the sample letter, advising them of their right to file a claim if they feel they were exposed at work. And of course, that applies to the employees who would potentially be covered under workers' comp.
So to clarify, again, like I said, repetition reinforces retention. So, when you talk about, how many people have to be notified, going back to that question then is that since everyone has to sort of log in to be on site at all the county office as well as the school districts, then, if employees are not in the area where the employee who has COVID or tested positive for COVID, do they have to be notified? What are the parameters for that?
It's interesting. So some employees travel, and that's been a little bit of a challenge. So M&O and custodial and special ed, there's some different people that travel from site to site. So this becomes rather challenging. Certainly when you think about the building, that's kind of the words they use, the building that person was in, whether people could have been exposed to or walked by or working in the area of. Some people do it in a more narrow fashion, and they'll notify everyone in that building. SDCOE kind of notifies anybody that's on the site, because at our campus, you can walk by each other in lots of different areas. The bathrooms are common, HR is common, so you kind of walk around. The mailroom's common. These are areas that you might go to if you're on our site. So each school district kind of uses their own definition, some sort of over notify, if you will. They notify everybody that might have been there during that period. And some people are more narrow and really stick to the people that worked in the building. Like if I work in building 5, and so if there was a positive, building 5 might be notified. That's a more narrow. Gets a little trickier when you have people, but I do believe that if they're working outside, the answer that we've gotten from loss control and they're in M&O and they had no exposure, you don't need to notify them.
Okay.
Or if they're, again, in those common areas and they're roaming around, and then there might be exposure, it gets a little tricky. Obviously, over notifying is better than under notifying, right? If you have to err on the side of notifying too many people rather than not enough. Obviously, there's stiff fines and penalties with all of these things. With the Cal OSHA has fines associated with not having that COVID program available and posted, and the training, and there are fines associated with not reporting into the Athens COVID portal within 3 business days, and there are fines associated with the non-notification of the AB 685. And that one's tough because a lot of people will call me on the weekend in a panic. It is not on the weekends, it's 1 business day. So if you find out on Friday, you do have until Monday, because I get a lot of panicked calls on Saturdays and Sundays saying, when does the 1 day start and end? So.
Okay. And of course, I was going to say that it's confidential as to who it has tested positive. So that's something to keep in mind. I know people are always curious, but it's very important to keep that confidential. And there was something else that you just said, and maybe I'll have to come back to it because now I've lost that thought.
And that confidentiality we protect in the Athens portal. Unless they file a workers' comp claim, you don't name the person that tested positive. You just put the information in and you have no name on there. And then on the notification letters, obviously the people are not named. We do get a lot of questions from, and I'm sure all of you guys do too, from staff saying we need to know who it was because we need to know if we're around them. And yeah, we don't give out that information.
Okay, very good. Yeah. So it has been if we thought life was complicated before, now there are many more layers of compliance and notification and communication essential.
It's caused some of the districts to have to rethink how their job duties are distributed both in risk and in HR. Because we have over 60 member districts, I have seen a lot of variance. In some districts, the COVID notification letters live in HR because, to your point, of the confidentiality. But there are some districts, because of the entering into the Athens COVID portal, and that's something they would normally do when they're reporting claims. You go into the Athens portal, you can either report a new work comp claim, or you can report just COVID, or you can report a comp claim that is COVID, but you're going into that same Athens portal. So sometimes they put COVID in the responsibility for the notification and risk, and that has caused some districts to have to increase their risk staffing because there are so many extra job duties with COVID that the same team isn't able to handle all of the responsibilities along with either workers' comp claims, auto, property and liability, and the COVID. So I have seen the COVID piece moved around between HR and risk.
Okay. Yeah, I imagine that right there is a communication challenge. Additionally, just because they're not always housed close together either, right?
Right.
And they're sort of under different divisions. Yeah. I have a question for you. Because I know from my work, it can vary. Is it more common to have, the claims management in the risk area or the business side area or in HR? What seems to be the pattern?
I'd say it's more common to have it in business services, but I have seen several districts move it out of business services and into HR, and then some districts have moved it from HR over to business services. It lives in business services because workers' comp is a spend and a cost. But also I can see how it lives in HR because it has to do with management of disability, return to work, which you well know, the return to work piece and the IPMs. So for the districts where workers' comp and the return to work piece for modified duty lives in business services, they have to work like this with HR. You really need, there's got to be a bridge and information's got to be going back and forth all the time.
Okay. Are there any suggestions that you have to all of our participants today as far as how to make that more seamless where they have to cross over?
I just think that it's really good if there's some cross training on the person that does risk and the person in HR that handles the leave and the time off work. Because for the districts that have their workers' comp housed in HR, that's their colleagues. So they're all doing disability management and the time off work and the return to work piece and the IPMs. For those of you where workers' comp lives in business services, you and the HR person that handles time off and the counting really need to work closely together because there's a lot of time frames where things end. I know a lot of employees don't know that our benefits actually do end, but things do end. Time runs out. 60 days of industrial leave runs out. Sick leave runs out, even if it is inflated with workers' comp. And so I think it's really good if the HR person that handles leave or the payroll person, if leave lives there, they have to really work real closely. There should be emails going back and forth all the time, sharing information with the risk management department. So, because you know what I see sometimes is overpayment of leave by accident, right? These are just errors that occur, sometimes large overpayments, sometimes small, but those are almost always caused by a lack of communication. And like, I'll give you an example. We had one department where payroll did not know that the claim had been denied. Well, this was very important because you know what happened. The claim is denied, no TD is going to be paid. And you know what payroll was doing? Advancing 60 days of industrial leave and paying full salary. And this person has now been overpaid more than a month's salary because of this kind of, and you know what that department was saying was, why didn't I know that the claim was denied? Well, risk management knew that, but HR and payroll did not know that. So that's why, so you know what should have been shared with them was the denial letter and the notification, and then they would have known, stop paying, we have a problem.
Very good point. I want to share with our participants today that in addition to this Q&A session we do with Felicia, I do host podcasts once a month as well. And there are 2 podcasts that might be of interest to you that were conducted in this last year that will give you some insight and perspective about the communication and managing of leaves and things like that. So one of them was with Mark Ponce that Felicia had introduced me to, and he's actually with Albertsons and has an extensive background, having previously worked with Sedgwick and nationwide, and now he's managing workers' comp for Albertsons. So his was a good interview. And then another one that was earlier on in the year, and I'm just quickly looking for the date here. Where is it? Well, maybe I'll have to send it out in my follow-up. Okay, yeah, I'll send it on my follow-up because it came with, I'm just blanking on his name right now, but he is actually the national director for ADA compliance for Sedgwick, I think it is, yeah. And so that was a very interesting podcast. I learned a lot. And so one thing I would encourage people to consider that in that communication piece, because this is where we see a lot of money, unfortunately, being spent when it might not need to be. And that when someone's been off 90 days, or really managing that FMLA, and if someone's been off 90 days, that's really when you should start thinking about doing an early interactive process to see where is this situation going and what can be done about bringing them back to work. It's not just about waiting for what the doctor says, because a lot of doctors don't understand the whole return to work concept, right, Felicia?
Well, and our benefits are rather complicated. So usually even applicants, attorneys, and doctors don't understand our process. And the one thing we don't want to be doing is running out of leave in a week or 2, and the employee knows nothing about what is going on and their options, and no IPM has ever been held. So even if they're not PNS yet, we don't want to wait until the end of days to be trying to figure out what's going to happen with notifying them that they're going to be running out of leave and losing possibly their position and their benefits and going on 39-month. So if you know that the time is running short and they're not PNS yet and you don't have permanent work restrictions, we can get a good idea from the claims team and the doctor what the work restrictions are going to be, and we should start interacting, to your point, right, earlier. I know we always interact after the PNS, but sometimes, you guys, that can be 9 months or 12 months, after the date of injury, and time is running out, and the hourglass and the sand is running out. Right.
Yes, and in the disability management field, we've long known that getting back to work can actually help speed up recovery, and it keeps employees engaged. So there are lots of benefits to doing that as well. And so just to follow up on my comment about the podcast, the other one I was referring to is Adam Morell. And so he talked about the ADA and the interactive dialogue, finding a balance. And then I also had employment law attorney Stephen Titsey and workers' comp attorney Mark Barber. We did a podcast actually right as COVID broke. So some of the information might be a little, just timing wise, but still it was a very interesting dialogue between the 2 attorneys, and when the 2 shall meet and when they don't. And so it was very interesting in that regard. So again, I refer our participants to that podcast series. So that's at relationships-at-work.com and then podcast. You can scroll through which ones are there. So now, I do a lot of work in the world of EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And so that's my go-to, so to speak, for that big umbrella to guide us about ADA. And then, of course, the FEHA in California, along with workers' comp. But what do the new EEOC guidelines on the COVID-19 vaccinations have to say? What does it really mean for us?
So the EEOC new guidelines on the vaccinations came out on December 16th, so also right during our break time. But they do on their website have 9 detailed Q&As sort of describing COVID-19 as a direct threat. And because of that, that's why we're basically able to take everyone's temperature, right, when they arrive at our office at SDC Week, because normally you're not allowed to do that because that's considered part of a medical exam. The reason why we're allowed to stretch, I'll say, some of the things that we can do is because the EEOC has determined COVID-19 as a direct threat at the workplace. So part of the detailed Q&A, and I encourage everybody to go and look that up. And I don't know, Deborah, we might be able to provide that as a follow-up to this because
Mhm.
it's really good. They talk a lot about, they recommend that employers encourage vaccination, but it is legally allowed to mandate vaccinations. If that's your policy and that's, obviously provided district-wide, or that's something that you wanted to do, you could do that because COVID's a direct threat, because there's been a lot of questions around that. Can we mandate vaccines? Now, are a lot of companies mandating vaccines? No. We work really closely, as you know, with our injured workers, with Sharp and Kaiser and Scripps, and they have all been vaccinating their healthcare workers and have not made it mandatory. There are several reasons for that. It's because they were the first, right, to get the vaccine. So I think that they felt that that would even increase reluctance. They also are shorthanded, as you guys know, on the healthcare side. We're shorthanded with nurses and doctors and everything. So they didn't want to make that worse. And as it turns out, even though healthcare workers have been first to get the vaccine, not all of them have been getting the vaccine. It is not 100% like one would think. So because of that, what EEOC is saying is their recommendation is encouraging a voluntary vaccination policy.
Wow. So, yeah, I just pulled up the website. I'm not sure this is the right one. I'm going to go ahead and put this in the chat box because it does talk about the interface of COVID-19 ADA and the Rehab Act. And so that the people may want to check that out. But if you could send me the link, Felicia, specifically to what you're talking about, we can send that in the follow-up. So everyone, what I just found on the internet, I put into the chat box for you, so you could actually link, click on it from there and see what I'm looking at.
The one thing I can say, and this lives in your world, of course, Dr. Dupree, in our world of return to work and IPMs, is there's been a lot of IPMs about coming back to work, certainly at SDCOE and all the member districts, whether or not they have underlying conditions, whether or not they're older and at higher risk, or whether or not they have kids at home. And so there have been all kinds of requests for non-industrial accommodations and having IPMs about those. The vaccines will also bring up another issue. They are saying that if you do mandate vaccines, meaning that you can't return to work until you're vaccinated, if that was the employer's policy, they're saying there would be a lot of interactive process meetings about that, about whether you had a health reason why you could not take the vaccine, or whether you had some sort of religious exemption to why you couldn't take the vaccine. There would be other things that, similar to what we've seen in the return to work just with COVID, because some of our districts are open every day with in-person instruction. So they've kind of already been dealing with this from an accommodation standpoint. I think the vaccination issue is also going to raise a lot of accommodation requests and a lot of need for IPMs also.
Yeah, this is really been an interesting area given the COVID and so forth. And I'd just like to put out to all of our participants that, as we've heard often, is this isn't our first rodeo. And so we have lots of other situations that we can call upon to give us guidance for how do we manage this situation. This is sort of new and unique, but I particularly was, that was something that was particularly emphasized by Attorney Tissey and Attorney Barber back in March, as far as, while this is new and sudden and what do we do, they both emphasize how, we could look to other situations to give us guidance on how we do this. And so I know I've had some really interesting interactive process meetings about underlying medical conditions. And certainly this is a time of where we want to exercise flexibility, because it is such an uncertain time, and things have been changing every day. Are we open? Are we not? Are we back in quarantine? And so, but we still go by the usual leave policies and things like that. And I know for a couple of people or a couple of school districts, they have independently extended their COVID-19 leave practices, even though the state has not. And so that's afforded people some more opportunity until we sort of see what's, how things are settling down.
One of the things that we've seen just recently, this just came up on last week, the county has reached out to some of our member districts. So some of you, I don't know, may be already dealing with this or see this in the future, asking if they could subcontract with our school nurses to use so that the county could use them to vaccinate the general population. Some of these would be on our school sites, and some of these would be out at the County of San Diego vaccination hub sites that are being developed, I guess. This raises a lot of interesting issues, both on the liability and the workers' comp side. Obviously, as you guys know, if you subcontract out your school nurses to the county to do vaccination, you have to have a contract or an agreement as to who's going to cover those school nurses if they get injured on the job, and who do they work for when they're on the job. Do they work for the county or do they work for you? And so that raises a lot of issues also on the property and liability side, which Julie manages. That's not in my expertise, but there's indemnification language. So if you do at your district, if you are considering that, something you do want to talk to the JPA about, because that raises a lot of very interesting issues. And also, if you decide to if you did have a mandatory vaccination policy, meaning your employees couldn't come back on the campus without being vaccinated, or if you decided to vaccinate your employees on site, the one thing we have gotten a legal opinion from our panel attorneys on the JPA side is those most probably would be workers' comp claims if they had an adverse reaction to the vaccine, both if you made it mandatory in order to return to work, or if you had the vaccinations on site and you held them there. So that's another thing to just consider when you're making your decisions on what you're going to do about your vaccination policy for your employees and your staff.
Okay, well, so we sort of rolled into the fourth point there. So, what would be the pros and cons, for having one or not having one? What have you seen happening out there?
So most employers, and I've been talking with LA Unified, and I've been talking with Albertsons and a lot of Sharp and Scripps, and they're large employers and Albertsons and Scripps and Sharp and Kaiser have a lot more COVID claims than we do. We have COVID workers' comp claims, believe me, we do, but we don't have that many of them. But you guys know why. We don't have the large bulk of our 40,000 lives that are covered in the JPA at work every day from 8 to 5 or 6 or 8 hours a day, whatever their normal shift was. And we don't have all of our kids on campus in the same way we did pre-COVID era. When you think about vaccination, how we have mandated policies for vaccines for our students, or for example, how we require that you have a TB test in order to come to work for in education. Those are legislated, right? So that's a little bit different, and there's no flexibility there because they're hard stop because it's the law. The vaccination question is new. And so a lot of districts are looking at this from the same, some of them are shorthanded, right, Deborah? And so because of having to have smaller cohorts and groups, we sometimes had to increase the staff in some areas. So you have to carefully consider, I really think that a lot of employers are really going to lean towards voluntary vaccination policies with more flexibility. The encouraging the vaccine, and I do see that some of our districts are going to vaccinate their employees on site. Some are looking into that now. I've already had some questions and about that. The thing to consider is that if you bring people or you use your own school nurses and you do decide to vaccinate on site, because it appears now that teachers and school staff are going to go in the next cohort in 1B, we're going to be hopefully next. And if that's where we are in line, then that's coming very soon. That might be coming in February, perhaps. And so right now, like SDCA, we use as the county for our every other month. We have all of our employees tested every other month, and you're in a cohort. I've already started this process, and we just go to the county, any county site, and get our tests. And we don't provide our test results to HR, but we let them know that we have been tested, and then we get our test date for our next every other month schedule. Some districts are looking at vaccination sort of like that, whether they have a voluntary policy and they send them out to county sites or the county hubs. And then some districts are considering, some have already agreed to provide their school nurses to the county to assist with getting all these people vaccinated. And there's a lot of issues to consider there from an insurance perspective that you need to talk to our office while you're creating these policies. Those agreements between the school district with the nurses and the county, they are very similar to ROP or when you take student teachers on your campus. Who is going to be their employer and who is going to cover them for workers' comp is by agreement. So you have like a contract. So it's a little bit different than employees that work on your site. So, and also if you do vaccinate on site and something should happen or someone gets sick after the vaccination, that very well could be a workers' comp claim because you've brought it into work, you have offered it to everybody, and usually they're doing it during work time. So these are just things to consider when you're thinking about how you're going to handle vaccination for your employee staff.
Yeah. Two thoughts came up to my mind, and then I want to open up the last 5 minutes for open mic and Q&A. It makes me wonder, given the history we have with TB, and at one point when smallpox was mandated with everybody. That's what I remember as a kid. If we might not go that way in the future as far as requiring a vaccine for this kind of flu because it's been so deadly, and now we have variations or mutations of it. So that's just something
more to come on that, right? And also for students, because we mandate so many vaccinations to start school right now, the current vaccines are for children. But you're right, in the future, that is something to consider, whether or not the COVID-19 vaccination will be part of all the other, your immunization card, right?
Yep. And then the other thing I just heard this morning, the CDC gave a very informative overview on CNN, and it was refreshing to hear such, informed people speaking and letting us know, but they are working on an over-the-counter testing kit, so that you can just go to CVS or Rite Aid or Walgreens and pick one up.
So that's great. I forgot about that topic. So thank you, Debra, that I have been getting questions starting last week. There are some districts that are doing rapid testing on site for students and staff and the general public. That's also something you want to talk to our office about to make sure that's also from an insurance coverage standpoint that you kind of cover all your bases. That's in partnership with the county. The county is already doing that with some of the sites around San Diego. And another thing that I've seen is some of the districts that are already open for in-person instruction have asked for the test kits. And they've asked if one of the physicians in our occupational medicine clinics could order the test kits, similar to like standing orders for EpiPens. And our occupational medical clinics do not like to do that for obvious reasons, for liability for their physicians. If they're not actually administering and training and overseeing the staff, they don't want to really write standing orders, and they don't want to write orders for test kits. However, there are test kits available through Quest Labs. If you contact me, I will give you the information on that. Some of the districts are already working with them, and they use their physician to write the orders for the test kits. So that's not a problem. And Concentra also has some monitoring and testing services that they can offer. If you want to do something different than sending people out to county sites to get tested. And some of these test kits are obviously, cheaper and rapid results. I will add something that the districts that are doing the partnership, it's like a pilot program on site and with COVID testing, it's interesting. They're rapid testing everybody. And then if you're positive for the rapid test, because we know that the rapid tests aren't as accurate as the COVID-19 tests, then they're following up with the COVID-19 test after the rapid test negative, or if the rapid test is positive.
Yeah, so lots of developments, and that's why it's so important to keep on top of this. And I'm sure that our future Q&A Mondays will continue on this kind of topic. One thing I wanted to acknowledge is that you mentioned the word direct threat, and a direct threat, as defined by the EEOC, is accommodation. I'm putting it in the context of accommodation, but I think that the notion can be extended, and I can see where potentially EEOC may may take this avenue. But, you know, direct threat means injury or harm to self and or to others. And so if there's any potential for that, then we need to either mitigate it or eliminate it, or we can't go through with whatever we're trying to do. So I'm almost thinking that, you know, maybe the testing and on-site vaccination may be a way of mitigating the threat, the direct threat, so that people can get back to work. And so I can see where, you know, it's gonna be a challenging. That's a whole nother area, you know, like you said, either some other medical condition why they cannot do a vaccine, or if there's some religious connotation or something else, there's gonna have to be pretty
Right.
strong evidence of why they do not take a vaccination because of the threat issue.
Well, and we've seen even in San Diego how there have been some districts who tried to open right after the new year, and the CTA filed suit, and the teacher said, we are absolutely not returning to work this soon. You know, this was like a January reopening date. I want to say they were going to reopen on January 4th. So we've seen what happens. So obviously the solution is everything you can do to make it safer, right? Everything that you can do to make it seem like it's safer is going to help us to get back to in-person instruction.
Yeah, yeah. And so with
on a
that,
larger
you know,
scale.
Pardon?
On a larger scale, because some people already are, but you know, on a larger scale.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to say thank you, Felicia, for such excellent information and partnering with me on this. I do want to encourage our participants today, if you want to go ahead and open your video and open your mic and ask Felicia and I any questions. We'll give it a few more minutes here. And if not, I haven't seen anything, just a couple that came through the chat box. And so one of the questions, if we hear about a case on Friday, you know, do we technically have until Monday? And you answered that, and I put that into the chat box as well.
24 hours. So you're right. If it's Friday afternoon, you know, then Monday afternoon is your 24 hours, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And Felicia's going to check into the COVID-19 training in Spanish, and then I already put the one link for the EEOC guidance, and then Felicia, if you could send me the link for the specific reference you have. What I'm seeing at the site I have had more than 9, so that's what I'm thinking there. We might be on different pages there. So let's try to be on the same site. Oh, I have a quick question for people before we close off. We normally do this program, well, we would have done this program back in mid-January, but that happened to fall right on Martin Luther King Day. And then I can't remember why we didn't do it last week, but anyway, and then so we pushed it to today. And then so our next one would normally be on February 15th. And I picked the 15th because I thought the 22nd was going to be President's Day. And now Felicia is saying that SDCOE is closed on the 15th for President's Day, not the 22nd. So I'm curious, are other schools, you can just put a yes, a Y, or N in the chat box. Are you open on the 15th, or are you closed? And so just put a quick Y or N in the chat box would help me, because then we can easily push this over to the 22nd. Okay, thank you, folks. For those who responded, you're closed. So let's just make a public announcement right here then that we will go ahead and move our next Q&A to Monday, February 22nd. And you'll be seeing notifications of that go out about a week ahead of time. And Felicia and I do put together, you know, we meet and we review, okay, what are we going to talk about? And so if you have specific things that you would like us to address in our next Q&A or any of the future Q&As, please go ahead and let us know either by email, well, that'd probably be the best way. Yeah, email, and then that way we can include your particular topics of concern. Okay. So I want to say thank you everyone for being here again. Again, Dr. Debra Dupree with Relationships at Work. I facilitate the interactive process and also help guide you through difficult situations involving employees with medical conditions. And of course, Felicia is the JPA manager with the County Office of Education. And so thank you all for everyone for your comments in the chat box. Really appreciate it. And yeah, we hope this is meeting your needs. That's the whole intent. So, okay. Thank you again, everyone, for coming. We'll see you virtually soon. Okay.
Stay safe and well, everyone.